is really above. Well, let me just put it this way. I've been to a heck of a lot of Labor Day dinners. And you usually get a bunch of putzes like me that come out and give speeches. And instead tonight you've got like a real person who is actually out there putting his, can I say the things I say on the radio? Can I say those things here? Okay, good. He's actually putting his butt on the line. He's out there exploring. You see, there are certain FEC rules that we have to be cognizant of and pay attention to. So Herman Cain is out there exploring, traveling around the country and kind of taking stock of where we are in America. And I couldn't help but think as I read through his bio and I watched him speak around the country, and I thought about, when I think of Herman Cain, I think about Godfather's Pizza, I think about Burger King, I think about Pillsbury. What am I leaving out here? God knows what. But as I think about those things, every single one of those involve, with the exception of the Federal Reserve, they all involve a profit and loss statement. They all involve a profit and loss statement. They all involve paying wages, meeting a payroll. They all involve making sure the shareholders were getting their return on their investment in a proper way. Something about he actually had to run a business. And when he took over Godfather's Pizza, they were on the verge of bankruptcy, much like the United States of America. And as I thought about that, I thought, you know what, he's exactly what we need in this country because he is not a community organizer. And today when I came in to meet Michelle to go through the run-through and see what we were going to do this afternoon, you know, between being a lawyer and talk show host, your ears are about this big. She's always listening to everything going on. And Mr. Cain, I want you to know that I heard someone refer to you today as the Terminator. The last time I was with anybody that even sounded like the Terminator, it was on a Black Hawk helicopter going up down the coast of California and just defeated somebody named Ray Davis. And he turned out to be quite a putz. When Mr. Cain gets through speaking, I want all of you to do me a favor. I want you to stop by the booth over here. Right, would you gentleman back there raise his hand? And I want you to pick up this brochure. Information about Mr. Cain, HermanCain.com. I want you to read up, and I want you to study, and I want you to listen, I want you to pay attention to this man. Not only does he have the business experience that this country so sorely needs, but he's a family man, an entrepreneur, a businessman. He spent his time running associations. He knows what it's like to actually be responsible and accountable to customers and shareholders and taxpayers and everybody else. Without any further ado, I give to the Denver, Colorado Republican Party, Herman Cain.
Let it be borne in mind that the tragedy of life does not lie in not reaching your goals. The tragedy lies in having no goals to reach for. It's not a calamity to die with dreams unfulfilled, but it is a calamity to have no dreams. The American dream is under attack. That's the bad news. But the good news is we are fighting back to take back the American dream. become a nation of crises. We have an economic crisis. We have an entitlement crisis. We have an immigration crisis. We have an education crisis. We have a moral crisis. And we have a severe deficiency of leadership crisis in Washington, D.C. But I believe that we can take back the American dream. I'm a product of the American dream. My mother was a domestic worker. My father walked off of a farm at the age of 18 with literally just the clothes on his back to pursue his American dream. One of his American dreams was for his sons to get a little bit better start in life than he did. And we did. Mom and Dad wanted us to go to college. We did. And graduate. We did. And one of the other dreams that my parents had was to one day own a whole house. You see, Dad grew up on a little small dirt farm in Tennessee. It had 3 rooms where 12 people lived. Mom walked off of a farm at the age of 18, also different farms, but they met up, got married, ended up settling in Atlanta. And when Dad walked off of that farm at the age of 18, my Uncle Ned, who is still alive today, said he wasn't even sure if L Jr. had shoes on his feet. But that didn't stop him from pursuing his American dream. And for most of my years growing up, we lived in what my brother and I used to describe as a half a house in Atlanta, Georgia. You know, it was a 6-room house with 3 rooms on one side and 3 rooms on the other side, with a wall going down the middle. We lived in half of it. Some people call it a shotgun house. And my brother and I used to say to Dad, Dad, why do we live in a half a house? Dad said, it's a duplex. But Dad, we only live in half of it. It's a duplex. Because you see, Dad was working 3 jobs. He was a barber, a janitor, and a chauffeur. And he was saving the money from one of those jobs to buy that whole house. That was one of his American dreams. And I'll never forget the day that Dad came home and told my mother, my brother, and I, get in the car. We got in the car. You don't argue with Dad. Dad drove west on Bankhead Highway in Atlanta. About 35 minutes later, he made a few turns. Ended up on a little street called Albert Street. Pulled up in front of the 3rd house on the right, a little brick house, not attached to any other house, with grass growing around. Dad announced to the family, this is our new home. We said, what? I was in the 8th grade, my brother was in the 6th grade, we jumped out of the car, we ran up to this house, brand new house, never been lived in before. Dad walked up to the front door, don't you know, put the key in, went inside. Dad then announced to my brother and I, it's got 2 bedrooms, and I'm gonna buy you boys twin beds. One for your mom, bedroom for your mom and me, and a bedroom for you boys. Because you see, living in that duplex, my brother and I slept on a cot in the kitchen. And now Dad is gonna buy us twin beds. We thought we'd have died and gone to heaven. My mother was in tears of joy. She didn't know that Dad had saved enough money working those 3 jobs to buy that house. Mom didn't even know that Dad had gone out and bought it. Don't try that today, man. Not a good idea. You'll be living in that sucker by yourself. Dad could get away with that. But that was one of his American dreams. And just like your parents, my parents, wanted to give us a little bit better start, that's what we want to do for our children and our grandchildren. But we are losing that every day under this current administration. We're losing it because of too much legislation, too much regulation, and too much taxation. And this is why we have got to change the direction of this country. The thing about being a businessman for 40 years, like many of you know how to solve problems. That's what's not happening in Washington, D.C. Problem solvers, businessmen. You make sure you're working on the right problem, like getting rid of the state's liabilities that you're committed to. He's working on the right problem, Mr. Stapleton. You must first identify the right problem. You must then set the right priority. Thirdly, you surround yourself with the right people. Then you put together the right plans in order to go after all of these crises that we face. And then you execute and lead. I'm not going to go through each one of those crises, but let me just give you an example of one, the economy, because that's on the mind of everybody. This economy is stalled, and it is stalled despite the fact that nearly $1 trillion have been spent to try and stimulate this economy. We cannot spend our way to prosperity. You and I knew that before he signed that bill right here in this building. Here's what I would do. Number one, reduce the top corporate tax rate from 35% to 25% because we are the only country on the planet that has not reduced the top corporate tax rate in 15 years. The only one. Number two, make the tax rates permanent. When you extend the tax rates for 2 years, you extend uncertainty for 2 years. That doesn't help business people. Number three, take capital gains tax rate to 0 and leave it there. Number four, suspend the tax on repatriated profits. Multinational companies have nearly $1 trillion offshore, but if they bring it back, they're going to have to pay taxes on it. So they leave it over there, building plants in Brazil, in China, and Italy and other places around the world. The last time this was done under the Bush administration, nearly $350 billion came back into this economy. Since our economy is now bigger than it was in 2003, it is estimated that nearly $1 trillion would come back into this economy at no cost to anybody if they just take the tax rate to 0 on repatriated profits. Anybody, but the liberals don't want to do that unless they can get a piece of it. So they'd rather leave it over there. And then number five, provide a real payroll tax holiday for all workers, the entire 6.2%, and employers. That's called direct stimulus, and it would have our economy growing at least twice the current rate, because we're growing at an anemic rate. Last year in 2010, this economy grew, GDP-wise, 2.6%. The year before that, it grew at a rate annualized of 2.1%. I don't call that a recovery. When China is growing at 10% per year on their smaller base in 15 years, they will be as big as we are if we don't start to outgrow China. We have got to use direct stimulus in order to be able to stimulate this economy and create jobs for the 15 million people that cannot find jobs. Work on the right problem. Work on the right problem. When President Obama took office, we have a problem with Social Security. We have a problem with Medicare. We have a problem with Medicaid. So passing another massive bureaucratic health care reform bill was not working on the right problem. Not at all. And all I got to say is, it's highly likely that if you all nominate the right person for president, for the Republican nomination, and the right person becomes president of the United States, I'll sign the repeal of Obamacare right here. That you sign the stimulus bill. Right here, in this bill. Can you hook me up? That not only was legislation we didn't need, we didn't want it. Before he signed the bill, the majority of the American people said they did not like that solution. So what do the liberals like to do when they call my radio show? Well, what would you do differently? It's something called HR 3400. It is patient-centered and market-driven. You didn't hear a lot about it because Princess Nancy didn't want it to go anywhere. And it didn't. It got stuck in committee, and that's where it is still stuck. But there was an alternative on the table. The American people were denied knowledge of that alternative, and that is a great starting point for the replace part of repeal Obamacare and replace it with something that the American people want that will not create a new bureaucracy. Work on the right problem. Immigration. Whenever you hear the terminology, comprehensive immigration reform, that's code for they don't know what to do. And the reason is, immigration isn't one problem, folks. It's four. Secure the borders, number one. Enforcing the laws that are already on the books. Promote the path to citizenship that's already there. We don't need a new one. Just get the bureaucrats out of the way. We have a path to citizenship already. Ask the people who got here legally. And the fourth problem, what do you do about the illegals that are already here? Empower the states to do what the federal government is not doing, and let each state decide how they want to deal with the illegals that are already here. We've got 50 laboratories out there. Use them. Work on the right problem. Now, I don't want to keep you here all night, but you can see that there's a consistency with which I approach all problems and issues. And that is making sure we're working on the right problem. Making sure that we set the right priorities. Surround yourself with the right people. This administration has only 7% of the appointees. 7% of the appointees who have ever had a real job. And we wonder why the policies fail. Surround yourself with the right people. I was speaking in Nevada about 2 months ago, and we had passed out the little brochure that Michael shared with you. I would like for you all to pick one up. A young college student stood up and said, "Mr. Cain, I'd never heard of you until a week or so ago." I said, "Don't worry. A lot of other people hadn't heard of me yet." She said, "I like what you say in this book. It's common sense. That's why I call it Common Sense Solutions." She said, "But the problem I have is, how are you going to get this done?" I said, "That's a great question. You see, I have a secret weapon that I will use when I become president of the United States, and that secret weapon is called we the people, because we the people are still in charge of this country, and the president should represent the people first."